Don't come to the dinner. The head count is final. I read the message from my son Mark while standing in my kitchen. The screen of my smartphone glowed brightly against the cool granite countertop. My son had sent the text at exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The dinner reservation was scheduled for 7. I had already ironed my favorite navy silk blouse and laid out my pearl earrings on the bed. I didn't drop the phone. I didn't burst into tears or clutch my chest. At 65 years old, I had buried a husband, managed a household on a tight budget for decades, and built a comfortable retirement through sheer discipline. I was long past the age of theatrical weeping. Instead, I simply set the device, face down. The dinner was supposed to be a grand celebration for my daughter-in-law Chloe's 30th birthday. They had chosen a place called the Glass House, an upscale seafood restaurant downtown that required reservations 3 months in advance. 2 weeks ago, Mark had sat at my kitchen island nervously rubbing the back of his neck. He admitted they couldn't afford the deposit. I had handed him my premium credit card, telling him to put it on file to secure the private room and cover the meal as my birthday gift to them. Just an intimate family dinner, he had promised me then. But over the past few days, the guest list had mutated. Chloe had invited her yoga instructor, her sorority sisters, and a half-dozen wealthy neighbors. I had become an afterthought. And now I was a canceled afterthought. I picked up the phone again and read the follow-up text. Chloe says the private room is too cramped. It would just be easier if you sat this one out. You understand, right? I understood perfectly. I understood that my presence clashed with the aesthetic of Chloe's milestone birthday party. I understood that Mark, as always, had chosen the path of least resistance. He would rather uninvite his widowed mother than tell his wife no. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange, hollow clarity settle over me. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at a table I was currently financing. For years, I had watched Chloe methodically reshape my son's life. When they first started dating, Mark was a relaxed, easygoing young man who loved Sunday barbecues in my backyard. Within a year, those simple barbecues were replaced by brunch dates at expensive bistros that I was rarely invited to attend. When my husband passed away 3 years ago, I thought my son would step up to offer support. Instead, Chloe stepped in managing his schedule by keeping him busy with home renovations and exclusive couples retreats. Mark just drifted along, adopting her opinions as his own. Chloe wasn't outright cruel, but she was entirely practical in a very cold, calculated way. She viewed people based on their immediate utility. I was useful when they needed a substantial down payment for their modern townhouse. I was useful when their golden doodle needed an emergency weekend sitter. However, I was absolutely useless when it came to a glamorous birthday dinner designed specifically for social media photos. She didn't want an older woman in sensible shoes sitting in the background of her champagne toasts, ruining the modern vibe of her carefully curated friend group. I walked out of the bright kitchen and down the hallway to my quiet bedroom. The navy silk blouse was still draped perfectly over the armchair, ready to be worn. I picked it up, feeling the smooth fabric slip through my fingers, and carefully hung it back in the dark closet. I didn't feel rage. Rage is hot, messy, and exhausting. What I felt was a freezing, absolute certainty. For 3 years, I had tolerated the subtle disrespect. I ignored the rolled eyes when I spoke, and the way Chloe would rearrange my living room pillows when she visited, as if subtly marking her territory in my own home. I had kept quiet to keep the peace. But peace is a two-way street. If you are constantly the only one paving the road, you are just building a highway for people to drive all over you. I walked over to my bedside table and opened the drawer. It was time to stop being useful. I reached into the drawer, pulled out my tablet, and tapped the icon for my banking application. My premium credit card, the exact one currently holding the massive reservation at the Glass House, had a very generous limit. I had worked 35 years as a senior hospital administrator, to ensure my retirement was comfortable and my flawless credit score reflected that lifelong discipline. I navigated to the card controls. There was a simple toggle switch labeled Lock Card. I stared at it for a fraction of a second. But locking the card completely felt too passive, and it might cause unnecessary issues with my automatic utility bills the next morning. I needed surgical precision, not a blunt instrument. Instead, I found the direct phone number for the restaurant. I knew the general manager, a sharp, polite man named Julian. My late husband and I had celebrated our 30th anniversary there years ago, and Julian always remembered his loyal patrons. I dialed the number. The restaurant was likely gearing up for the busy dinner rush, but Julian answered the line himself. "Oh, the Glass House Julian speaking. How may I assist you?" "Julian, this is Helena Vance," I said smoothly, keeping my tone pleasant. "I believe you have a private room booked tonight under my son's name, Mark Vance. It's secured with my card ending in 8114. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Vance," Julian replied cheerfully. "We're just putting the finishing touches on the room for the birthday party. Will we be seeing you tonight?" "No, Julian. There has been a change of plans. I will not be in attendance." I paused, ensuring my voice remained perfectly steady. "Furthermore, I need to inform you that I am withdrawing my financial authorization for tonight's event. My card is not to be charged for any portion of the bill." There was a brief professional silence on the other end. Julian had likely seen every iteration of family drama imaginable. "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Vance," he murmured softly. "I will remove your card from the file immediately. The party will need to provide an alternative method of payment." "Exactly," I agreed. "Thank you, Julian. Have a wonderful evening." I ended the call. No arguments, just a quiet adjustment of the facts. With the restaurant situation handled, I returned to the kitchen. It was barely 5 o'clock in the evening. My night completely unexpectedly belonged entirely to me. I opened the refrigerator and surveyed the contents. I had originally planned to eat heavy, rich restaurant food, but now a simple, comforting meal felt infinitely more appropriate. I pulled out a fresh salmon fillet, a crisp bundle of asparagus, and half a lemon. I worked methodically, enjoying the quiet, steady rhythm of chopping, seasoning, and searing. There was no one to rush me, no one to complain about the smell of the garlic, and no one to subtly suggest I should have used a different cooking pan. I poured myself a generous glass of crisp Pinot Grigio. At 6:45 p.m., my tablet pinged loudly from the living room. It was a notification from social media. I usually ignored them entirely, but curiosity got the better of me. I tapped the glowing screen. Chloe had just posted a video story. The camera panned quickly across the private dining room at the Glass House. It was undeniably spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering city skyline. Massive floral arrangements of white hydrangeas sat on the tables, and crystal glassware sparkled under the modern chandeliers. The caption flashing across the screen read, "Kicking off my 30s with my favorite people. Let the champagne flow." I zoomed in slightly to inspect the crowd. Mark was standing awkwardly in the background, looking uncomfortable in his tailored suit, holding a dark drink. There were at least 25 people crammed into the room. The original headcount I had agreed to fund was strictly 15. She had added 10 extra guests in the last 48 hours without a single word to me. 10 extra people ordering premium steaks and craft cocktails on my dime. I took a slow sip of my wine. The salmon sizzled softly on the stove. I plated my dinner set, a placemat at my small dining table, and sat down. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling a profound sense of relief. By 8 o'clock, I had finished my dinner, cleaned the kitchen, and moved to the living room with a hot cup of chamomile tea. I picked up a mystery novel I had been meaning to finish for weeks, adjusting the brass reading lamp over my favorite armchair. Across the city, the birthday feast was undoubtedly in full chaotic swing. Through another social media update this time from one of Chloe's loud sorority sisters, I caught detailed glimpses of the sheer excess. The tables were utterly crowded with towering seafood plateaus, heavily stacked with Maine lobster tails, fresh oysters, and Alaskan king crab legs. I clearly recognized the restaurant's famous signature dish, a dry-aged tomahawk steak that cost $150 a plate. Several of them were visible on the long decorated table. Bottles of expensive vintage wine were being poured freely by the attentive white-coated waitstaff. Chloe sat directly at the head of the table, wearing a sparkling silver dress, laughing loudly with her friends. She looked entirely triumphant. She had secured her perfect venue, her perfect audience, and the absolute perfect aesthetic. She had successfully curated her evening, completely removing the one element that didn't fit her modern vision me. I could easily imagine Mark sitting quietly next to her, nodding along to conversations he didn't care about. He was secure in the false knowledge that his mother's platinum card was resting safely in the restaurant's computer system, ready to absorb the massive financial impact. He probably hadn't even looked at the menu prices once. Why would he bother? He had never had to worry about the actual consequences of his wife's extravagant tastes, as long as I was quietly providing the safety net beneath them. I turned the thick page of my book. The paper felt heavy and satisfying between my fingers. I read a chapter, then another. The tea slowly cooled in its ceramic mug. I didn't check the clock again. The momentum of a free, luxurious meal always carries a greedy crowd late into the night. I just had to wait patiently. The grandfather clock in my hallway chimed exactly 10 times. The lavish dinner at the glass house would finally be winding down. The espresso cups would be empty, the dessert plates cleared away by the staff. The server, perhaps Julian himself, would approach the head of the table with the thick leather-bound folio containing the evening's grand total. I could picture the entire scene perfectly in my mind. The loud, drunken chatter would naturally lower as the bill arrived. Mark, desperately wanting to play the role of the wealthy, generous host in front of Chloe's friends, would casually reach for the folder. He would open the cover, his eyes skimming quickly to the bottom line. Given the massive seafood towers, the multiple tomahawk steaks, and the endless bottles of premium wine, the final number would easily surpass $4,000. Perhaps even closer to $5,000. Mark wouldn't panic immediately. He would smile confidently at the server and say, "Just put it on the card you have on file, the one under Vance." And then the server would deliver the cold reality. Politely, of course. Julian trained his staff impeccably. "I apologize, sir, but the cardholder contacted us earlier this evening to completely withdraw authorization. The card has been permanently removed from your file. How would you like to settle the balance tonight?" Mark's confident smile would freeze instantly. He would blink rapidly, the heavy words taking a long moment to penetrate his passive mind. Chloe, noticing the sudden awkward delay, would lean over the table. She would demand loudly to know what was wrong. The server would simply repeat the factual statement. No authorization, no safety net, no free ride. I closed my book gently and placed it on the side table. I stood up and walked to the kitchen to wash my teacup. The complete silence of my house was a stark, beautiful contrast to the absolute chaos I knew was currently erupting miles away. At exactly 10:15 p.m., my cell phone began to vibrate violently on the kitchen counter. I dried my hands slowly on a dish towel and walked over to inspect it. The bright screen flashed with Mark's name. I let it ring. The harsh sound buzzed aggressively against the granite, demanding immediate attention. When it finally stopped, a notification for a frantic voicemail appeared. 10 seconds later, the buzzing started again. This time, it was Chloe calling. I watched her name light up the dark kitchen. She was likely furious, her perfectly curated evening completely crumbling around her, in front of her wealthiest friends. I let her call go straight to voicemail as well. I walked into the living room, turned off the reading lamp, and sat back down. The phone rang a third time, then a fourth. Mark, then Chloe, then Mark again, in rapid succession. They were entirely relentless. Finally, at 10:30 p.m., a distinctly different name appeared on the screen. Brenda, Chloe's mother. Brenda was a woman who deeply shared her daughter's obsession with social appearances, but she was older and lacked Chloe's brazen, unearned confidence. She was easily flustered when things went wrong. I picked up the phone and pressed the green button. "Hello, Brenda," I said softly, my voice perfectly level. "Helena." Her voice was incredibly shrill, bordering on genuine hysteria. "Helena, what on earth is going on? We are literally trapped at the restaurant. Mark is sweating in the manager's office, and Chloe is having a full panic attack in the restroom. The staff won't let anyone leave." "I seriously doubt they are holding you hostage, Brenda," I replied calmly. "They are simply waiting to be paid for the expensive goods and services they provided. But your card, they said you canceled the card. The bill is $4,800. How could you do this to us?" On Chloe's 30th birthday, I leaned comfortably against the doorframe. "I didn't do anything to you, Brenda. I simply stayed home exactly as I was strictly instructed to do by your daughter. He uninvited you?" Brenda stammered loudly into the receiver. The sheer panic in her voice quickly shifted into deep confusion. "Chloe told everyone you felt unwell and decided to rest at home to avoid the crowds." I chuckled a dry, completely humorless sound. "No, Brenda. I was explicitly told my presence would make the room too cramped for her friends. I was told it would be much easier if I sat this one out. So, I sat it out. And I naturally took my wallet with me. But Helena, $4,800. Neither of them has that kind of limit on their cards right now. You know they just paid for the expensive roof repairs on the townhouse last week." "I am fully aware," I said evenly. "Which makes ordering $300 bottles of wine a very poor financial decision, wouldn't you agree?" There was rapid shuffling on the line and then a muffled, angry argument. The phone changed hands, roughly. "Mom!" Mark's voice was desperate, cracking slightly under the immense pressure. "Mom, please. You have to call the restaurant right now and authorize the charge. Julian is threatening to call the police if we don't settle the tab immediately. Julian is a professional, Mark. He won't call the police if you figure out a way to pay the bill. Have your lovely guests pitch in. There are 25 of them, I believe." "I can't ask Chloe's friends to pay," Mark hissed into the phone. "It's completely humiliating, please, Mom. I'm sorry about the text. Chloe just really wanted her own crowd tonight and it got complicated." "It wasn't complicated at all, Mark." I answered, my voice dropping to a hard, cold whisper. "You made a clear choice. You chose to exclude me from a dinner I was paying for. You chose to let your wife treat me like a disposable bank account. I am simply enforcing the consequences of your choices." "Mom, please, I'll pay you back." "No, you won't," I stated plainly. "Because I'm not paying it. You finalized the headcount, Mark. I suggest you finalize the bill." I tapped the red button. I turned off my phone completely and placed it inside a kitchen drawer. I didn't need to hear the rest of their desperate excuses. I went to bed, slipping under the heavy down comforter, and slept more soundly than I had in months. The next morning, I woke up at my usual early time, made a strong pot of black coffee, and went out to the back patio. It was a crisp, bright morning. The neighborhood was beautifully quiet. I found out later through a mutual acquaintance who had unfortunately been at the dinner exactly how the disastrous night concluded. After I hung up the phone, Mark had to walk slowly back into the private dining room, pale and profusely sweating. He had to stand directly at the head of the table next to a weeping, ruined Chloe and loudly admit that they couldn't cover the massive cost of the party. The glamorous aesthetic vanished instantly into thin air. The wealthy sorority sisters, the yoga instructor, the neighbors, they all had to reluctantly pull out their wallets and divide the massive bill. Some had to angrily transfer money via phone apps. Others had to drain their checking accounts on the spot. The atmosphere turned incredibly sour. People who had come expecting a luxurious free ride were suddenly forced to pay $200 a head for a party they didn't even care about. Chloe's perfect Instagram birthday ended with her supposed best friends grumbling openly as they calculated tip percentages on their phone calculators. Several guests left in a huff without even saying goodbye to the birthday girl. The public humiliation was absolute and complete. It wasn't a legal trap. It wasn't a complex scheme. It was simply the brutal reality of living way beyond your means and alienating the person holding the safety net. They had wanted to play the roles of wealthy socialites, and I had simply removed the stage props. At exactly 10 o'clock, I heard the heavy crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. I didn't need to look out the window to know it was Mark's car. I remained comfortably seated on the patio, sipping my coffee. A moment later, I heard his key turn in the front door lock. He walked slowly through the house and stepped outside. He looked entirely exhausted. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie was gone, and he had dark, heavy circles under his eyes. He stood near the edge of the patio, shifting his weight nervously. "Mom." He started, his voice thick with a messy mix of shame and lingering resentment. "Do you have any idea how deeply embarrassing last night was? Chloe won't even speak to me this morning." I set my ceramic coffee mug down on the glass table. I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't a victim. He was a 32-year-old man who absolutely refused to take responsibility for his own household. "I imagine it was very embarrassing," I replied evenly. "But it was an embarrassment entirely of your own making. You could have just told me you were canceling the card," he argued weakly. "You didn't have to blindside us like that in front of everyone. And you could have told me to my face that I wasn't welcome instead of sending a cowardly text message 3 hours before the reservation." I countered, my voice sharp and final. "I am not your ATM, Mark. I am your mother. And since you and your wife clearly do not respect that relationship, the financial privileges that came with it are permanently revoked." I reached into my cardigan pocket, pulled out a small envelope, and placed it firmly on the table. "I've packed the winter coats you stored in my hall closet. They are waiting by the front door. Please leave your spare key on the counter on your way out." Mark stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He realized I wasn't negotiating. I picked up my coffee and looked back toward the quiet garden. "Close the door tightly when you leave, Mark.